reclining on a warm, smooth rock at twilight, not in a hurry, with the soft salt of imagined air resting on your lips. The sea lies before you as a broad sheet of patient blue, an old friend speaking in a hush. You sense the long memory of this water, how it carries traces of ancient cycles, gentle rhythms, and the faintest flavors of minerals that once passed through underwater volcanoes, estuaries, and the mouths of unseen rivers. You do not need to move. The ocean's surface moves for you, and the story arrives in slow layers, like the tide gliding over a beach of fine sand. Now you let your mind unspool the thread of time, backward, far back. The early earth hung beneath a dimmer sun, and its first oceans collected from steam and rain that fell for ages, gathering into basins, pooling in low places, finding the quiet that water always seeks. The young ocean was a workshop of chemistry, gently mixing volcanic breath and dissolved minerals, letting molecules meet and part in persistent, repetitive dances. The light would have been different then, muted through a thicker air. If you picture the colors, let them be soft and folded, pale blue, merging into gentle grays, a haze filtering the brilliance into a calming wash. On those ancient shores, imagine shallow flats, warmed by long days. In those shallows, life found a foothold in quiet carpets and low mounds where microbes layered themselves into patient tapestries. These microbial mats, and their layered stone cousins called stromatolites, grew by tiny increments. Think of it as a slow, repeating choreography of bubbles, films, and grains, captured and cemented by patient living crusts. You can almost hear the very soft fizzing of oxygen drifting from early cyanobacteria as sunlight wakes them each day. Over unimaginable spans, this breath helped the atmosphere change, like a room being aired out by a window that is gently cracked open, little by little. There is no drama in the telling, only the reassurance of steady change, of a process that keeps returning each day to the same luminous task. You allow your thoughts to float over a still lagoon of the Ediacaran period, where soft-bodied creatures rested on gentle sea floors like leaf shapes and quilted forms. They do not hurry or angle for attention. They simply lie or drift, their bodies like quiet gardens without hard shells or spines, tracing currents with serene patience. In this scene, life is a texture more than a spectacle, a presence that lingers close to the sediment, basking in low, diffuse light. The water carries fine particles, and each mote sinks slowly, a tiny snow of minerals and organic dust that comes to rest in thin, velvety layers. You find the rhythm soothing. You notice how the gentle rhythm continues, always returning, always pausing, like the simplest cradle song. As time moves, a mild newness arrives, not as a burst, but as a careful unfurling of forms. The early Paleozoic seas open like a vast, shallow library, where living shapes arrange themselves into new patterns. You picture the Cambrian sun gliding through water that is cool and green. Trilobites move across the sea floor, not as hunters in a chase, but as steady travelers, their segmented shells catching soft glints of light. Near them, leaf-like animals eddies and swirls that never need to prove anything. Everything is unhurried, even when bodies learn to swim by moving fins and flexible edges. They do so as if they are practicing a gentle calligraphy stroked on water. The currents write and erase in one timeless motion. In your inner quiet, you trace the outline of a Cambrian reef, rising like a low city of stone and living tissues. It is not tall, it is broad, like a very slow choir, voices made of sponges and microbial builders, each adding a note, a limestone layer, a comforting structure. Lavish names settle over certain creatures, but you let names be a lull, a soft poem of syllables rather than sharp labels. Brachiopods open and close like breathing shells, their valves moving with the poise of a sleepy sigh. Filaments of algae drift like stray threads in the water. Near the base of the reef, the sediment is a pillowy bed of silt, and small animals burrow and trace, leaving tunnels and tracks that feel like calligraphy on soft paper. You sense the presence of time, not as a pressure, but as a loosely woven blanket, warming these moments that stretch gently forward. The gentle rhythm continues as you drift onward to the Ordovician seas. They are generous and filled with diversity that settles like a lace shawl over sandy plains and limestone shelves. Crinoids raise their feathery arms like underwater fern fronds, capturing bits suspended in the water column. Nautiloids, with their elegant coiled shells, glide above, their buoyancy adjusted with care, moving not in fits, but in a serene measure. Around them, tiny plankton drift in luminous abundance, each one a minuscule lantern of life that catches sunlight and turns it into chemistry and growth. The seas form wide platforms where carbonate mud gathers under warm, shallow waters. In your mind, you run your fingertips along a smooth piece of limestone that began as soft mud, pressed quietly by layers above, and you feel the coolness of preserved time under your hand. Seasons pass in long, slow loops, and sometimes conditions change enough that communities reweave themselves. Cooling periods come like a grey cloud cover that empties a soft rain, and then warming returns, as if some far-off window lets in sunlight again. Through such cycles, reefs adjust, their builders change, their shapes relax and reassemble, but the pattern remains familiar. The sea's wide fields of life fill with new voices while keeping the tone gentle. The story never needs a jolt. It proceeds in a low hum, with a steady heartbeat you can float upon. You find yourself in the Silurian shallows, where reefs once more spread like gardens. Corals with patterned skeletons, tabulate and rugose, stack themselves into small rounded mounds. Down current, tranquil lagoons cradle fish that are slowly learning to carry their bodies with fins and early jaws, not brashly, but thoughtfully, as if trying out motions borrowed from the calm swaying of seagrasses. The water is very clear in your mind's eye. Light reaches the floor and draws dappled patterns on the sand. The seafloor itself has textures, ripple marks soft ribs of a sleeping seashell, formed by gentle waves that repeat their movements day after day. Imagine the Devonian, often called a time of reefs flourishing and fishes exploring more complex shapes. Large reefs stack themselves into wide plateaus. You picture them as soft, rounded hills beneath the surface, hosting quiet neighborhoods of creatures specialized in catching very small particles, as well as grazers that nibble like delicate shears along surfaces soft with algae. On shore, plants begin to colonize land more fully, altering the breath of the planet in slow, weighty steps, their roots drawing rainfall into soils, their leaves pulling carbon from the air. Some of that influence finds its way to the ocean in gentle threads. Nutrients shift, oxygen patterns adjust in certain basins, and the ocean responds, sometimes by settling into deeper stillnesses where the bottom waters grow low in oxygen, a quiet pocket where the usual bustling slows to a meditative hush. Even in these shifts, the ocean remembers its balance. Over long enough spans, circulation lifts and renews. The gentle rhythm continues beneath the waves of the Carboniferous, in shallow seas that visit low-lying continents. Crinoids stand in meadows, their stems like slender columns, their crowns like flowers held out to the current. Brachiopods rest in arrays, their shells like calm little boats lined up along a dock. High above in the air, oxygen is abundant, and on land it lends a particular verdant vigor. In the sea, it helps breathe life into broad spaces, though the sea always works in layers, with upper waters kissed by winds and deeper waters speaking a slower dialect of time. The moon pulls on the water with a familiar strength, drawing tides across wide shelves, washing silt and sand from place to place. The days are their steady selves, measured by the simple path of light to dark, moment to moment, and yet, very slowly, the length of day inches forward through deep time, because earth and moon dance in a way that changes with the ages. The sea absorbs that change with the quiet acceptance of a deep sleeper adjusting slightly on a soft bed. As Pangaea assembles in the late Paleozoic, the ocean changes its outline. Imagine coastlines drawing closer and forming long, tranquil gulfs and restricted basins. Evaporation folds salt into shining pans and sapcars where crystals grow like tiny gardens. Warm shallows host reefs built by sponges and microbial partners, and in quieter pools, layers of fine sediment settle that later will become rocks with subtle stripes, the sort of stone you might turn over in your hand and admire for its muted bands. Toward the close of the Permian, the system experiences a long, heavy pause in many places. Volcanic breaths, shifting currents, and altered chemistry combine to settle the ocean into an extended lull where many lineages conclude their chapters. Even here, we keep the focus soft. Think of it as a long winter that tests the patience of the sea, and then, over time, spring returns. In the Triassic, life repopulates seaways, like a tapestry being rewoven with familiar threads and new patterns. Ammonoids coil their shells swirls in elegant logarithmic curves that feel pleasing to the eye. Small reefs return, this time with corals that more closely resemble modern builders, joined by sponges, algae, and a rising chorus of tiny plankton that will play a major role in the ocean's quiet economy. Fish find steadier forms and new ways of gliding. The water renews its sparkle without raising its voice. Along continental margins, the ground beneath the ocean opens in slow ribbons where new seafloor is born. Magma rises, cools, and becomes basalt, and a conveyor moves away from spreading ridges with such slow dignity that you imagine it as the inexorable tide of midnight itself. You float onward to the Jurassic, with warm seas and rich planktonic communities. In your mind, you hold a chalky flake, soft and crumbly, made of countless tiny plates from minute algae called coccolithophers. These small makers release intricate calcite shields that fall as a gentle snow when they die. Over long spans, that snow piles into layers of chalk that later will become cliffs, glowing pale in the sunlight of future shores. The idea is soothing. So many tiny lives, each unhurried, each part of a patient accumulation, becomes something enduring and serene, a record of steady days and quiet nights. In the same waters, foraminifera, little single-celled architects, build their coiled houses with the same careful economy. Their shells, too, descend through the water and settle into calming stacks on the seafloor. The Cretaceous spreads warm, shallow seas across continents, and rudest bivalves, with their unusual shapes, form reefs where waves lap with a softened beat. Ammonites grow intricate sutures on their shells, a carving so precise and delicate that it looks like frost patterns on a cold window pane. You picture them drifting with stately motion beneath a sun that sets the water in hues of blue-green glass. The world is well oxygenated in many places, and life, in general, is abundant, but the tone remains a lullaby. Where seas grow somewhat restricted, or where nutrients tip into a different balance, darker layers can settle, rich in organic matter, like an extended nocturne written into the mud. In open waters, the rhythm is more airy, and the bright snow of calcite continues to fall. Over the long threshold into the Paleogene, after another planetary shift, the ocean reorganizes with the same calm persistence. Currents find new pathways around continents that have drifted like half-sleeping islands. Antarctic waters begin to encircle the pole, and a cool stream circulates with noble steadiness. Corals embrace symbiotic partners, tiny algae in their tissues, exchanging shelter for sugars in a dance that makes colors by day and limestone by night. On shore, mammals expand their roles, and in the ocean, early whales glide through watery halls, their motions so smooth that the water does not complain. The ocean continues to keep the planet's rhythms, absorbing, redistributing, and holding heat, holding salts, holding memories of far-flung rivers that come to deliver quiet stories. Imagine now being a passive passenger on a grain of sand in a shallow, ancient sea. Each wave lets you roll slightly, then sets you You move a little, and then you stop, and then you move again, a few shell lengths forward, then back, in a tiny journey repeated many times. Eventually, a gentle current tucks you into a temporary hollow, and a veil of silt drapes over you. Another veil arrives later, then another, and each is as soft as dust falling in an abandoned room. With time, the weight above presses just enough to keep you and your companions snug. Water circulates through the pores between grains like ghosts of breezes, bringing dissolved minerals that slowly knit grains together. Sand becomes sandstone, and your place in the bed is more permanent, a position held in stillness as if the world made you a pillow and asked you to rest. The chemistry of the ocean, despite all these changes, remains remarkably steady when viewed from the drowsy distance of millions of years. Salts arrive from weathering rocks on land and from vents in the deep, and are removed by the formation of minerals and the slow burial of evaporite layers. The ocean balances itself with a poise that invites trust. It does not hurry, but it does not forget. When volcanoes exhale, the ocean listens. When mountains rise and the rains nibble at them, the ocean listens. When ice caps wax and wane, the ocean listens. In each case, it adjusts, like a sleeper turning over in bed to feel a new cool side of the pillow. If you drift downward with your imagination, you can visit the deep, where light fades into the tone of midnight blue, and then to a very gentle black. Here, particulate organic matter descends as marine snow, a constant flurry of the smallest fragments, feathers of carbon and calcium and silica, providing a slow, continuous meal for creatures that make quiet lives in the dark. Transparent jelly-like forms pulse without hurry, and long, thin fishes hold still with a patience that seems like meditation. Sometimes, when certain bacteria or tiny plankton bloom near the surface and later sink, the snowfall thickens, soft as ash, and then returns Mats of microbes still build little mounds that resemble the ancient stromatolites, reminding us that the ocean keeps its old habits as well as its new. In tropical waters, modern coral reefs rise with delicate complexity, their inhabitants slipping in and out with quiet purpose. The same underlying patterns that began long ago still weave the present, like a familiar melody played on new instruments. Sunlight enters, salts hold their stable chorus, currents trace their curves, and living things exchange energy and elements in cycles that seem simple when viewed from above, and in detail reveal themselves as elaborate lace. Plankton, the modest foundation of modern seas, hold tremendous influence not through drama, but through persistence. Diatoms wear glass shells of silica, intricate and delicate, sinking like tiny beads to the sea floor when their brief lives conclude. There they collect in soft layers of ooze that, when buried, can become rocks that sparkle with the ghost of their class. Coccolithopers, with their calcite plates, continue to form enormous volumes of chalk and marl, quiet as snow, but multiplied across eon-long winters and summers, until their presence is monumental. Foraminifera, with their coiled or chambered tests, record temperatures and the chemistry of the seawater in subtle variations of their shells, even encoding the pale weather of those days in their mineral arrangements. When scientists sample these tiny archives, the story reads like a soft, steady script in limestone, reassuring in its detail. The ocean's circulation supports this whole theatre with an orchestration that does not ask to be noticed. Winds push the surface water, and because of Earth's spin, that push slides the water to one side, creating a spiral of motion through the depth, the Ekman spiral, a graceful helical flow that stacks layers of movement like gauze. Where winds draw surface water away from a coast, deeper, cooler water rises, bringing nutrients upward in a measured, replenishing breath. Across whole basins, vast gyres sweep in wide ovals, creating areas of relative stillness and areas of persistent drift. Deeper still, the thermohaline circulation moves like an underwater river that connects major oceans, sinking where waters grow very cold and salty, and travelling along the bottom like a slow, assured pulse that can take centuries to complete a loop. You can imagine placing a fragile paper lantern into this current and knowing that it will continue for lifetimes, steady and without fluster. The sea's chemistry is buffered by carbonate systems that act like a quiet supervisor, ensuring that acidity stays within a comfortable range. When carbon dioxide dissolves, it forms mild acids that in turn interact with bicarbonate and carbonate ions. Shells, stalagmites, and corals feel this dance, and the ocean adjusts, dissolving some structures here, laying down new structures there, with a gentle hand. Deep zones where calcium carbonate is more soluble, known as the carbonate compensation depth, lie like an invisible ceiling. Above, chalk and calcite can accumulate. Below, they dissolve and leave the sea floor to silica and clays. Even this boundary, so quiet and abstract, moves with climate circulation patterns, not quickly, not harshly, but like a tide across deep time. Imagine looking closely at a sandy ripple on an ancient beach now preserved in stone, the crest sharp and the trough smooth, captured with the crisp honesty of a cast. Each ripple formed from the back and forth of small waves, their period measured in seconds, repeating the same gesture again and again until a storm brought a blanket of new sediment that froze the pattern in place. Elsewhere, you see cross-bedding, where underwater dunes migrated across shallow shelves, leaving inclined layers that angle in one direction, then another, like the careful folds in a restful blanket. Trace fossils are written across these surfaces. A ridge shows where a trilobite once strolled. A scratch shows where a small creature tasted the sediment and moved on. A U-shaped burrow marks a small home. All of these records are quiet and deeply human in their way, telling of motion, rest, and the gentle needs of living things that go on even when the world is not watching. You drift through the Jurassic again, but this time you focus on sound. The ocean has a low, continuous hum. Waves near the surface contribute a hush. Distant currents murmur in frequencies too profound to be called notes, more like a bass line of being. In shallower water, you hear faint clicks from crustaceans and the ripple of sand grains sliding against one another. Far from shore, storms send long, deep swells across the surface, and they pass overhead in dignified silence. Cetaceans later learn to use sound as lantern and language, but you do not need to listen to conversations now. You only need the background music of water itself, a soft score that aligns with the slow, easy rhythm of your breathing. The moon's pull makes its gentle contribution. Tides rise and fall with a quiet certainty. In tidal flats, pools are left behind as the water recedes, each a little stage where conditions change through the day. Salinity rises as sun warms them, and evaporation steals some water. Later, the tide returns like a friend bringing news, and everything relaxes into the renewed flow. Over millions of years, the distance between Earth and Moon changes at a pace that would make even a glacier seem hurried. The result is a shift in the strength of tides and the length of day, a sharpening or softening of nature's metronome, which the ocean accepts with endless patience. You may feel a pleasant heaviness, a hint of drowsiness, as you follow the simple arithmetic that governs life in water. Diffusion carries dissolved substances from higher concentration to lower, the quiet leveling of flavor in a soup. Small creatures live in a world where water feels thick and friction is strong, a realm of low Reynolds numbers where gliding is less common and pushing against viscosity is the norm. They equip themselves with cilia and flagella that beat with unhurried whirls, creating flows that bring nourishment to them or carry them gently to where the water tastes better. Larger animals glide in a different regime, their movements drawn out and smooth to conserve energy and to let the water slip around them like silk. Every scale of life listens to the properties of water and moves within their bounds, not as a constraint, but as a familiar cradle. In quiet coves, bioluminescence exchange between oxygen, enzymes, and a gently excited molecule, returning to calm with a tiny gift of light. Imagine wading slowly through such a lagoon and watching your footprints gleam for a moment and vanish, a reminder that even the most delicate displays can be a simple part of nature's routine. The interplay between the sea and atmosphere is continual and soothing to think about. The ocean breathes in carbon dioxide and later returns some of it. Winds brush the surface and give water a small lift as it rides toward distant coasts. When storms form, the ocean responds with thicker swells, but it also releases energy back to the air, moderating extremes. On longer timescales, cycles in Earth's orbit tilt, and timing adjusts the distribution of sunlight, and the ocean stores and releases heat accordingly, always managing the planet's comforter, sometimes tucking it in more tightly, sometimes loosening it. He sometimes grows and drifts, carrying stones from far places, then melts and releases them onto the sea floor like gentle notes placed on a page. Sediments capture these rhythms without complaint, and later, when looked at with patient care, they give back the memory of centuries and millennia in their layers. The gentle rhythm continues as you consider how continents wander. They do not rush across the map. Instead, they travel as if they too are falling asleep and slowly rolling into a new position. Where plates meet, mountains quietly rise, and the rain begins the long process of carrying their materials back to the sea, grain by grain, ion by ion. Where plates part, new ocean floor appears, and where one plate slides beneath another, the sea floor finds its way downward, carrying with it the stories written in sediments, shells, and mineral veins. Even earthquakes and volcanism, often thought of as abrupt, serve in the longer view as the steady punctuation of Earth's ongoing letter to itself. On the sea's surface, none of this needs to be alarming. It is only the deep, careful rebuilding and recycling that keeps the ocean young at heart. Still awake, comment the secret word, nebula. You are free to let your thoughts wander now, perhaps to a warm epicontinental sea that once pooled across mid-continental landscapes in the Cretaceous. These seas were shallow and inviting to your mind, with sandy bottoms, gentle slopes, and long sandbars that curved like sleeping seals. The ecosystem there would have been filled with ammonites rising and sinking on the strength of their internal buoyancy, fish sliding around reefs built by peculiar rudist bivalves, and beds of oysters filtering water in rhythmic pulses. Sunlight sparkled through the upper meters, and below, suspended matter gave the water a milky clarity, not crisp, but comfortingly soft. The white rain of coccoliths continued to settle. In quiet, deeper areas, the bottom waters sometimes rested too long, oxygen thinner than usual, and the sediment there recorded a simple dark stillness that would later become a band in a rock, a line in a long sentence. There is something soothing about the idea of ammonites and nautiloids adjusting their buoyancy with trapped seawater and gases inside chambers. It feels like a living analogy for finding equilibrium, gently, test the waters above, and if they preferred the lower, cooler layer, they could ease back down as if nestling into a familiar pillow. The edges of their soft bodies would reach out to taste the current, then withdraw with unhurried grace. Over generations, the mathematical neatness of their shells persisted, a spiral that could have been drawn by a sleepy hand, guided by a quiet metronome. On a broader scale, the balance between the ocean's calcium and carbonate remembers the locations of reefs. Reefs are powerful in their softness. They are not loud. They are living breakwaters that diffuse the energy of waves, slowing and spreading the force so that lagoons can hold their clarity and sands can settle in peace. In the Carboniferous and Permian, sponges called archeocyathids earlier, and later other sponges and corals with helpful microbes formed these features with a politeness that belied their impact. In the Triassic and Jurassic, the baton passed efficiently. In the Cretaceous, rudists joined and, in some places, led. In each case, reefs provided homes, nurseries, and shelters. Even when they fell silent during long lull periods, they returned when the waters once again found conditions they enjoyed. Their persistence feels like the ocean reminding itself of its favorite way to build a city. If you go microscopic, the seafloor sediments seem to whisper. Siliceous oozes are made of the remains of diatoms and radiolarians, their glass skeletons falling gracefully and accumulating in pale drifts. Carbonate oozes collect where waters are friendlier to chalk, and here the settling fluff forms soft beds that rock the deep sea to sleep. Clays arrive from far away by wind or by the steady outflow of rivers, adding their own colors and textures, sometimes red with iron, sometimes green with minerals from altered volcanic glass, sometimes merging so smoothly that the transition feels inevitable. Burrowing animals stir these layers, mixing the top few centimeters like gentle chefs folding batter, bringing oxygen into the upper layers and leaving the deeper ones in a more restful state. Their traces later look like branching roots in stone, a nod to the universal act of making a home. Think for a moment about the gulf between day and night in the ocean. Near the surface, some plankton rise toward the light each day and sink as evening returns, a daily vertical migration that, in its enormity, is perhaps the largest movement of biomass on the planet. Even this is done with the softness of a slow elevator ride. Small bodies drift upward as warm layers steady their ascent. By dusk, many begin to lower themselves again, avoiding the brightness that would make them too visible. This cycle helps blend surface and deeper waters, moving nutrients and carbon gently up and down, connecting layers that might otherwise feel separate. It is another instance of the sea's quiet knitting. The oxygen that floats through our own blood once passed through waters like these. Plants and algae in the sea release oxygen as a byproduct of capturing light, and over time, much of it entered the air. The atmosphere we savor in our quiet moments is, in part, a gift made underground, under waves, in lagoons, and over continental shelves. Even before complex animals swam with any confidence, the ocean had already rehearsed the act of giving the world a breath. Later, as animals became more numerous and more complex, the The sea also learned to host deeper partnerships, from coral algae symbioses to the mutualism of tiny fish and anemones, to the communities around vents where bacteria feed larger organisms by turning chemical energy into organic meals. Each of these partnerships is a small, sturdy pact written in gentleness. You might picture now a chalk cliff in a quiet landscape. It rises white and clean above a blue-grey sea. The cliff is made of millions upon millions of the platelets of coccolithophers and the shells of tiny foraminifera. A breeze moves grass at the top in calm waves that echo the sea below. The chalk crumbles if you press it with a finger, each crumbling a little avalanche of microscopic skeletons. These cliffs are, in a sense, the slow exhalations of ancient oceans, solidified and lifted for all to see. They retain a hush. Even a gull calling overhead does not disturb their presence. They simply stand and dream of the time when they were not a cliff at all, but a drifting, sinking snow in a water column lit by distant suns. More recently, in the grand scheme, corals and their symbionts mastered a way of being that is both productive and tranquil. Corals offer a home, sheltering tiny algae inside their tissues. The algae perform photosynthesis and share some of the sugars they produce with the coral host, which returns nutrients and offers a protected place with good access to light. This exchange builds reefs at a pace that is slow to the eye, but brisk by geological standards. The colours we see on modern reefs come from this community, but even in the ancient record, where colours are not preserved, the structure speaks volumes. Pillars, plates, and branching forms create microhabitats and gentle flows through maze-like passages. Fish choose their pathways through this architecture like visitors strolling through a museum, never rushing, always aware of the quiet. If at times conditions change and corals release their symbionts, the colour fades to a washed porcelain. This is a soft way of saying that the relationship is sensitive. In the long record, reefs have retreated and returned many times, always to the tempo of the planet's own music. High temperatures relax back to lower ones. Acidification that grows from an excess of dissolved carbon eases as the ocean rebalances. Currents bring coolness and fresh supplies. Reefs find their breath again. The long view lets each of these events feel less like crises and more like the weather of eternity, never permanent, always capable of finding equilibrium again. Across vast stretches of time, the ocean has learned to hold on to its salts. Sodium and chloride, magnesium and sulfate, calcium and potassium form a steady chorus. The relative proportions remain surprisingly constant, even as the total amount of salts can vary a little with the filling and emptying of basins, with the locking of water in ice, or the liberation of it back into the sea. This stability gives marine life a dependable stage. Osmoregulation is a quiet art that fishes and invertebrates practice with ease, letting their internal fluids rest near the composition of the sea, or carefully adjusting to differences with pumps and pores that truly resemble breathing at a cellular scale. When conditions change, such as in estuaries where rivers mix with ocean water, fresher and saltier moments. From time to time, life writes in the margins with strange penmanship. Rugose corals with horn-like shapes, crinoids with ossicles that stack into beads, ammonites with sutures that look like frost ferns, trilobites with compound eyes made of crystals, bivalves that reinvent the reef. Each is a small innovation expressed in a tone that never needs capital letters. You might hold a fossil in your hand and feel the coolness of time in the stone. The pattern of growth lines on a shell reveals tides and seasons. The way rings in a tree reveal years of quiet labor. In some rare cases, even the soft tissues are remembered as impressions or films, outlines that suggest the shape of a fin, the breadth of a leaf-like frond, the curve of a siphon. These whispers remind us that what we see now is only the surface of a story that is deep and restful underneath. Under the right conditions, sediments preserve not just forms, but chemistry. Isotopes of oxygen in shells tell of water temperature. Ratios of carbon record the balance between life's production and the deep's returning breath. The presence of certain minerals marks times when the bottom was anoxic and peaceful in a darker way, letting iron bind with sulfur to form pyrite, like small clusters of sunbursts captured in rock. Each of these clues is a quiet signature. None shouts. All must be read with the same patient speed at which they were written. When the deep currents of the world find new routes because continents drift or gateways open and close, the changes come as tides on a canvas of centuries and millennia. One example is the encircling current around Antarctica, which formed when southern continents moved apart enough to let water flow all the way around without obstruction. This created a cool band that wraps the planet and helps separate the polar climates from the warmth to the north. Its formation is one of the softly decisive moments in Earth's climate history, a page turned in a book where every page is a full landscape. Another is the closing and opening of seaways in the tropics, which guide where heat can be moved across the planet. Each step is deliberate and measured, and the ocean is the calm actor that makes these moves possible. Consider how a single molecule of water might journey through all of this. It evaporates from a warm pool, rises into a cloud, condenses into a drop, and falls as rain into a river. The river carries it to the sea, where it joins the upper currents, tasting the sunlight and the air above. Then, perhaps near a chilly pole, it cools and sinks, beginning a slow travel in the dark among the bottom currents. It moves along the base of the ocean, crossing basins, slipping through old submarine valleys. Centuries later, it rises, warmed and buoyed by conditions somewhere far away. It finds itself near the surface again, and perhaps evaporates once more. This loop is not a destination, it is a flow, and it helps the planet keep a steady temperature, a steady breath, a steady rhythm that is felt in your breathing as you listen. The gentle rhythm continues in every quiet shelf and basin. In small lagoons, seagrasses sway with an undramatic grace. They trap fine sediments and invite small fishes and invertebrates into their cycles unfold gently. Over and over, the ocean arranges this kind of refuge and watches as life chooses to remain, to feed, to hide, to raise young, and then to drift onward. Sometimes, in the record, a layer of volcanic ash settles out among the marine sediments. It arrives in a single soft event, blanketing wide areas. Later, that ash layer becomes a thin, distinctive line that helps mark time. By matching such lines in different places, the timeline becomes clearer. Other times, tiny spheres called spherules accumulate in a layer that tells of a far-off event. Even those layers, connected to higher energies, appear in the rock as quiet stripes, no thicker than a book's page, a simple reminder that the earth goes on, that plants and animals continue their slow tasks before and after, and that the sea, above all, remains the planet's calm storehouse of energy and life. If you sink onto a peaceful continental slope, you encounter turbidity currents in the geologic story, which are gravity-driven flows of sediment that move like thick underwater rivers. They may begin as a gentle slumping of sediment that accumulates until it flows, laying down graded beds where the coarse settles first and the finest comes to rest last. When lithified, these deposits are sandwiched as beautiful sequences that geologists recognize. In the lived moment underwater, even these events have a grace, as if the slope gently exhales a load of sand and mud and lets it slide down to a deeper shelf, where it finds its long-term resting place. On still longer scales, these layers become part of mountain belts raised high and then returned by the rain. The loop is always there, always unhurried. In polar seas, cold and clarity rule. Phytoplankton bloom in pulses as the sun returns after winter, casting a turquoise glow under thin ice. Little crustaceans like krill graze in quiet clouds. Larger beings move steadily through this scene, nearly soundless in their efficiency. The ice breathes too, cracking, sliding, and sometimes forming open water leads where life is invited to gather. In the deep winters, the sea rests like a cathedral in dimness. In the bright summers, it hums gently. The same soft chorus plays elsewhere, with different instruments, but always at a volume suitable for sleep. Even in tropical waters where storms form, the sea knows how to hold its tone. After the rushing air has passed, the waves subside in long swells that carry the storm's memory toward distant shores. Reefs and banks soften that energy, protecting lagoons and mangrove forests that, in turn, hold sediments in place, preventing erosion. Mangrove roots rise like fingers from quiet water, capturing leaves and silt and creating nurseries for fish and crustaceans. Seagrasses collect around their edges. The light under mangroves is green and restful, refracted by leaves and water in layers that look like stained glass. Such settings are full of life, but there is no clamour. The day proceeds, the tide turns, the night arrives, and the morning follows in a pattern as gentle as the ocean itself. On the seafloor, organisms leave elegant records of their daily you see them on a walk, perhaps in a desert where ancient seas once lay, they feel like evidence of an unbroken continuity. You may glide your fingertips over them. They are cool, and they fit your fingers with the same comfort as the track of a small garden snail on a quiet morning path. Salt marshes, estuaries, and deltas represent the middle ground between river and ocean. Their sediments are like pages that turn lightly. Tidal channels move back and forth, rewiring the landscape with each cycle, cutting new bends, filling old meanders. Plants and microbes trap mud, and the land grows outward slowly, as if breathing in. Then the sea draws near, and the margins recede, as if breathing out. With time and patient accumulation, thick sequences of mud build, compress, and become shale, a rock that splits into smooth laminae. Some shales gleam with a gentle luster, and their smell, when damp, hints at old organics kept safe and comfortable in the dark. Far offshore, under equatorial sun, the surface layers can be a bit nutrient poor because the ocean's own structure allows the warm waters to sit atop cooler, denser layers like a quilt. Here, life spreads thin but wide, and adaptations favor efficiency. Small, slow metabolisms, clear bodies, and quiet feeding strategies rule. Over time, drifting animals find floating bits of wood or seaweed to gather under. These become temporary villages that last until they sink or drift into different regimes. Under the subpolar fronts, upwelling and mixing are livelier, and blooms of plankton appear. Each region holds its own slow music composed by temperature, light, and wind. The story of ancient ocean ecosystems is also a story of minerals and their forms. Carbonate muds, calcite spar that later fills tiny cavities with clear crystals like frozen drips, chalcedony that seeps into voids and hardens into pale blue or white agates, evaporite layers of halite and gypsum formed where shallow arms of seas quietly dried, leaving behind glistening beds. Each innovation arrived in multiple lineages because nature enjoys repeating successful ideas in slightly different accents. In the water, these changes often took place among communities that persevered beneath them with equanimity, filtering, burrowing, and drifting as they always had, adding new participants to their networks with ease. Sometimes isolated basins became hypersaline as evaporation exceeded inflow. In these quiet amphitheaters, salts precipitated and layers built up astonishing thicknesses. Later, these salt beds, soft and buoyant, flowed slowly underground, forming pillows and domes that gently pushed aside the rock above. On the seafloor, they created subtle swells. In the long view, even salt is a sculptor. Under deep cover, it moves like cold wax, reshaping the foundation so gradually that only the stone notices, and the ocean above continues its long meditation. It can be soothing to hold in your mind the idea of equilibrium moving back and forth across thresholds. When the ocean takes in more carbon, its chemistry leans toward acidity, but that leaning encourages more dissolution of carbonates, which slowly neutralizes the shift. When temperatures fall and ice grows, sea levels drop and expose more shelves, and weathering patterns change. small processes act like cushions, resisting sudden moves, smoothing the edges of change. If you place your attention on a single trilobite in the Ordovician, an animal shaped like a small segmented shield, and watch it move across the sea floor, you notice it is never in a hurry. It pauses, tastes with its antennae, and continues. The sediment beneath is soft to its feet. It passes tiny tube worms, a bit like passing sleepily arranged candles. It leaves a faint trail, a record of its passing that will be wiped away by the next ripple. But in certain lucky places, the trail will be buried gently and preserved. When we find it, we will recognize the same unhurried self we know, the creature that walked and left proof of that walk like a small poem. In this way, the ancient sea feels very close, as if its inhabitants had stepped out for a moment and might return when the light grows softer. Modern coasts carry the memory forward as well. Barrier islands form and migrate with waves and tides, moving landward or along shore, depending on which way the currents lean. Lagoons develop behind them, and these gentle waters host quiet communities of seagrass, crabs, and fishes. Offshore, long sand ridges parallel the coast, shaped by persistent swells that push sediment into elongated bars. Each feature is transient on the human scale, but becomes another layer in the sedimentary story, later to be cemented and lifted. Even the sound of waves breaking on those bars is part of the script, a rhythmic punctuation that repeats with every tide cycle, every day, every season, with just enough variation to stay interesting and just enough consistency to invite sleep. If you feel your eyelids growing heavier, know that the ocean supports that feeling. The rise and fall of waves at the surface mirror slow breathing, and ancient marine rhythms mirror longer cycles of rest and motion. The alternation between warm periods and cool periods is like the Earth's own sleep cycle, a gentle oscillation that restores balance over time. During warm intervals, coral reefs are more widespread, tropical waters expand, and carbonate systems flourish in high latitudes. During cool intervals, ice grows, and marine life finds different centers of activity. The ocean's general kindness persists across both, as if it knows how to make a home in any climate that is offered. Sonar images of the sea floor, gathered in the present day, sketch the global stage where ancient ecosystems played. Broad abyssal plains lie smooth and unassuming, like the floors of ballrooms. Mid-ocean ridges curl like stitched seams. Trenches form sober arcs where plates bend downward. Seamounts rise as isolated towers, sometimes capped by ancient reefs that saw tropical sunlight long ago before subsidence, and the ocean's own drape lowered them into dimness. Atolls form over subsiding volcanoes when corals keep pace with the sinking land, until a ring remains, holding a blue lagoon like a jewel in a simple setting. All of these shapes existed, in one form or another, while the lives we have been describing carried on their daily quietudes. When we consider how knowledge of ancient seas is gathered, the methods temperatures and ice volumes. Pollen grains drifted from land tell the tale of vegetation through time, which correlates gently with climate. Ash layers provide exact points to match between different records. None of this is hurried. It is an accumulated knowing, formed over decades, itself a mirror of the ocean's own pace. Now imagine immersing yourself in a Triassic lagoon at dawn. The water is warm at the top and a bit cooler below. The air smells faintly of salt and a memory of flowers carried from land. Small fishes patrol in groups, their scales no more reflective than the surface itself. Soft-bodied creatures glide along the bottom. The reef nearby is modest in height, and its surface is alive with tubes and plates and small fans that wave. The whole scene is a yawn in slow motion, stretching and resuming a calm posture. If you listen closely, the only sound you hear is the gentle lap of your own heartbeat, a reminder that your body carries the ocean within it, in its salts and fluids, in its electrical hush and its lunar cycles. When the Mesozoic ended and the Cenozoic began, the ocean kept doing what it does best. It kept moving heat, storing carbon, nurturing plankton blooms in spring, hosting migrations along fronts and currents, and recording in its sediments everything that passed through it. Whales learned to sing long songs in the deep, songs that travel for kilometers with minimal loss, because water carries low frequencies easily. Currents traced loops that fish followed. Birds skimmed the surface and landed on floating rafts of seaweed. Beneath them, crabs scuttled softly over sand ripples, and snails traced neat trails through algae films. Night fell, day returned, and the rhythm rolled on. Even today, the ocean contains ancientness in its ions. If you taste a drop on your tongue, you taste weathered mountain ranges and old hydrothermal vents. You taste storms that passed over empty spaces and then fell as gentle rain on forests. You taste the hidden lakes that occupied valleys carved by slow glaciers. All of that is mixed and settled into a solution so balanced that life feels at ease. It is perhaps for this reason that floating in the sea can make the mind heavy and the limbs light. The chemistry fits us, and we fit it in ways that are more than coincidence. If your mind wanders to a quiet beach at night, let it be one where the stars are clear and low slung above the horizon. The sea is a presence rather than an action. Occasionally a small wave strokes the shore and retreats, leaving a thin, shining trace that dries in seconds. You sit and feel the air cool in your lungs. The smell of salt seems clean and sleepy. Somewhere far away, a shipping lane carries lights that move like slow satellites. Beneath them, the depths hold communities that do not know or care about human schedules. They glide and feed and rest in the same steadiness that has prevailed from the beginning. Ancient ocean ecosystems remind us that change does not always arrive like a clap. Often it arrives as a sigh. The composition of seawater, adjusted in response to long-term cycles of mountain building and erosion. Ocean basins opened and closed, but only so that currents could find new routes. Living communities rearranged themselves, and new families came to prominence. A reef that once was made by sponges might later be made by corals, and later is always needed. Grazing is always needed. Burrowing is always needed. Drifting is always happening. The cast changes, but the play remains a chamber piece, never a march. If you need to envision a single shape to take to bed, consider the spiral of a nautilus shell. Its gentle curve follows a mathematical grace that nothing in nature forced, yet everything in nature made possible. It carries chambers that once held different versions of the same animal's buoyant self. It is strong without being heavy. It is plain without being empty. That spiral, found in so many forms, from galaxies to hurricanes to small shells, is not a symbol of grandeur here. It is a symbol of rest. It invites the eye to trace it inward and then to close, content that there is no abrupt end, only a continuing inwardness that becomes sleep. As you count these images, the ocean continues to wash along the edges of memory. The gentle rhythm continues. Microscopic creatures carry on their slow photosynthesis. Deep currents pass ridges and are slightly deflected. Sound travels and fades. Calcium returns to and leaves skeletons. Sands migrate a meter, then pause for years. Rocks under the sea are pressed and warmed and altered, then uplifted and eroded, and their particles return to the sea in a cycle so smooth that the idea of start and finish seems less important than the idea of being in the loop and letting it carry you. At last, you may feel ready to return to the present shore. Sense the steadiness beneath you, and notice how your breath matches the sea without effort. The story of ancient ocean ecosystems remains with you, not as a sequence of facts, but as a series of soft textures and flares of light underwater, as the patient work of reefs, the slow fall of marine snow, the gentle turning of currents. The wider world outside your window is as safe as this imagined shore, right now. You are comfortable, you are held, and the night has a kind expression. If this slow voyage brought you comfort, you are welcome to let it continue in the background with the playlist link, or to return here another night and rest on this same smooth rock at the edge of this same mellow sea. If you would like to support more quiet journeys, a gentle like and a soft subscribe help us keep releasing these calm episodes as often as we can. Sleep well, breathe easily, and let the ocean's